wants to hear me lecture them. And so that's my guess, that's my assumption. And so I'm gonna try to speed through these slides as quickly as possible so we can just get to Q&A. But if you all have questions in the middle, like, please cut me off or like raise your hand and, you know, I can answer them. And also I'm gonna be pretty opinionated here, and so that means that I'm probably wrong, because like strong opinions are not always complete. And so feel free to like provide another opinion and be like, I disagree with this or whatever, if you feel like doing that. All right, so this was supposed to be hiring for grit, and then I realized that there's probably just like a lot more going on in the job market. Like if I put myself in all of your shoes, like, you know, there's like mass layoffs in tech, and I'm assuming that if you're in like an entrepreneurship course, you probably want to, like some people here at least want to work in tech. And so I thought about, okay, if you're like trying to start a company, I feel like there were a lot of mentalities that kind of got adopted in this like 0% interest rate economy that are swiftly getting uprooted, and it's going to be like pretty harsh for people who aren't able to let go of those mentalities, because they're gonna run up against the reality when they're trying to look for a job, or especially if you're starting a company. And so I thought I would just go through some of these, and again, it's more like to set the energy, and then we can go into Q&A. And so for anybody, I'm assuming everybody here, like, do you know what I mean by 0% interest rate mentalities? Okay. All right, yeah, good. I'm not that clever. It's good. All right, I put all these slides here. They're just blank slides because I didn't want to like, I feel like you like peek and you can see like the slides ahead, and I want to like guard against that. Okay. All right, so again, I'm assuming that people here want to start a successful company, probably the wrong assumption. Would like the journey of scaling something, whether or not you're a founder or like maybe an early employee or whatever else, and that you all believe that money can be used as a tool for good. I know that's like a contentious thing to say these days, and I also am assuming that you'll not take me too seriously, and so just throwing that out there. And then like I said, that you don't want me to lecture you all day, that you have a lot of concerns about the marketing world, and we'll get more value out of Q&A, probably. And so, how many people here intimately understand this, like the operating system of a company, that there's like, you hire the people, you do the work, and then you get the outcomes? So everybody here, does that seem right? No, that's wrong. That's like totally wrong. So the way that this goes is that you start with the outcomes, and then you generate the work, and then you hire the people. And actually, this flip is kind of embodies how we got to where we are today. And it also embodies how it will always go in booms and busts in markets. And so the first thing I want to lay out is that this is the operating system of a company. You really start with what do you want to get done, then you generate the work, and then you try to figure out whether or not hiring new people will actually solve your problem. Right? This seems like very obvious, but it's amazing how easy it is to forget this. So, just wanted to lay that out. Okay, and so in practice, what does this mean? It means that you want to build a product, you want to find believers and makers in that product, you want to iterate towards what people want, what they actually want, and you're usually wrong about what you think they want, and then you want to set a really strong vision from there. And like, I'd say maybe 7 out of 10 founders that I talk to fail because they care more about the vision of the company they want to start than actually building a successful company. And so you can do whatever you want with that information. You could still like start a company or join a company because you believe in the vision. But I'm just letting you know that I find that that's like a frequent failure mode. And the founders who are like, you know what, I just want the journey of starting a successful company, they just go at it like over and over again, and then they eventually get it. And it might not be like the most interesting company in the world, it might not be OpenAI, but they get that experience. And I think like outlining that dichotomy is an interesting observation. And so the first thing I want to do is just like pull from some people here. Is anybody here running a company or has tried to? Awesome. Do you guys have any stories about like hiring someone and it not working out, or like working with someone and it not working out, that you feel bold enough to share with everybody? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
I'm hiring right now, so I think we'll see if it works out or not.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Are these like the first hires?
Yeah, founding engineer and founding account executive.
What about your co-founders?
Just one co-founder.
How's that going?
Great. I think in terms of like our relationship, I think we realized that two things, like similar, like upraising and background, in a sense of like, you know, what we're working on is like, I started from the convenience store space, so like very similar backgrounds and experiences related to that, and then also alignment on what we want out of the company, and I think that's helped us make a lot of decisions together.
Cool. Very cool. And then do you all have any experiences hiring people and it not going well or going well? And yes.
Yeah. For me, before I did e-commerce company, and what's it called, I was working on that for several years with my partner, essentially. And then early on, we started out, it was like, all right, let's just get something working, essentially. And then we'll see how it goes. And throughout, as the business grew, our visions, like, I guess the outcomes each of us wanted to change over time.
Right.
And it's like, okay, that's best to like exit and go our separate ways.
Yeah, this is really common, like outcomes and alignment, and it's like it gets even harder with more people.
Yeah.
And I think that like the thing is that when you start, and let me know if I'm wrong here, you just want to win. Like that's all you care about. You just want to win, and you're not going to get like the best people. You know, you're going to get like a lot of B players. Let's be honest, and you'd be happy to have them. You know, like because you're just early stage, you want to get stuff out, and that's like kind of how it starts. But what you realize is that like the value systems end up being off, right? Like you have these like values that like underpin where you want to go in the world, and those end up being off, and those end up becoming like much more important when like you start getting some success or you start hiring people, and that becomes a problem. And so, yeah, the reason why I wanted to open with that, or go for it.
Oh, sorry.
Yes. Yeah, please.
Oh, I was just saying it's interesting that you say that because like I was working on this project before as well, and I think the reason me and my co-founder decided to split ways, I always thought it was because our vision didn't align. Like a lot of times we didn't see eye to eye on things, and like again our outcomes were different. But like you saying that like the vision piece, I think that's like it's interesting for me to reflect. That was it actually the vision, or was it just like our work ethic and like exactly where, in terms of like, I don't know, was it the outcome in our work and our personalities that clashed, or was it just that we didn't like was the vision?
Right. What do you think it was?
I always thought it was the vision, but now that I think about it, I think it might be different. Like both of us had passion for building, but our ways of building was very, very different. And I think that reflected in terms of like how we see the company.
What was your way of building? What was their way of building?
I think I'm definitely a much more like, you know, the lean startup kind of way, whatever, where I like to go back and pivot. I'm not someone who creates like a very long plan and creates the product first and then like the whole strategy. I want to test and explore. And they were like the engineering person, and they had like a very clear vision where they're like, this is exactly what we want the product and the prototype to look like. And they were kind of just pushing it in that direction, whereas I was very much like in the exploring and constantly changing it based on like, you know, just the feedback that we're getting. So I think we were having a lot of clash where we weren't agreeing on the product itself.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And there are cases where both builds are like, they work out.
Yeah.
I mean, I think OpenAI is like a great example of like, but it's also like Sam Altman has seen like thousands of companies succeed and fail. So like 99.99% of the time, getting feedback from your customers is like always the right move. Because you don't actually know what they want.
Yeah.
Like if you did, then like everybody here would be amazingly wealthy and have like a bunch of good problems to have, right? And so, thanks for sharing that. So this is the problem as I see it, and I put as I see it. I think zero interest rates led to a lot of cash in tech. I think that's led to a lot of people who care about cash, and you see this in like a lot of industries and markets where when cash goes to it, it's like a lot of people who want to better their lives and get a better job go to it, but they don't really. Then there's like less makers who care about the craft. And just like as a little bit of background, I was out in Palo Alto, so I dropped out of school and I basically worked out of Palo Alto in 2012. And even around that time, like I was like hacking. I mean, like I'm obviously a loser, you know, like I was just like hacking at like my friend Eric Simon's house in Palo Alto, and he was like this kid known as like the AOL kid who like basically slept on AOL's campus and like used all their food and just started his company out of their campus, and it was like a huge story. And so this was kind of like the vibe of like Silicon Valley back then, and like now like there are a lot more people who are a little bit more polished. They care more about titles and cash, and none of that stuff is wrong, by the way. This is just how I see it right now. If you were starting a company, right, is that you have a lot more people like this, and that breeds a lot more entitlement and less output. And output wins at the end of the day. Like your velocity is the number one like differentiator that you have as a startup. You have basically nothing else. And many of these people have now been laid off, and you need to make sure you don't hire them. So like, that's the last point, and that might seem brutal, but like I'm saying that because actually it might be applicable to how you think about approaching looking for a job as well, if you're looking for one. So like, care about the craft, care about like just making an impact, and like these things might not sound appealing to you, in which case like, okay, it'll be like a little tougher to go into a market where cash is more strapped. But this is kind of the problem as like a founder starting a company. And I also want to, like, I know there's a lot of doom and gloom in this, but there's like still more demand for like tech jobs than ever. So I do want to like caveat a lot of my slides with that, so it's not like all doomer, Yes, please.
I feel like it's really interesting that you bring this up. Like I personally have not been, because I'm a senior and I personally haven't been looking for work in tech because of like hearing about these types of like layoffs and stuff. And I feel like when I've heard about it, maybe it's just like influenced by the media, or it's like kind of exaggerated because it's like college students like pissed because they can't like find a job. But
For sure.
it seems like a lot of it happens in like kind of really like insensitive ways, like the Zoom call thing, or like someone will put like a really, really large amount of employees and kind of like let a lot of them go, and it's just been happening in a really like systemic way. So do you feel like that problem is more rooted in like the work ethic of like individuals entering the market, or do you think that like in general the tech industry is kind of like built in a way that was like kind of not super like well predicted, and it ended up in this kind of like mass like layoffs? Like I don't know if it like does my question make sense? Like
Yeah, it's an excellent question too. So for a little bit of background, at the time, so we ended up doing 2 rounds of layoffs at Loom in 2022, and I led the first round as our VP of People. So I had a dual exec role as CTO and VP of People, and I led our first round of layoffs with 7 months of HR experience, basically. So I did like all of the wrong things, but not because like I wanted to, it's because of like my incompetence. And so I'm okay with saying that, that's fine. I think that like both are probably true, like I think that it's just such a massive market that, there's certainly people who maybe were given a chance as like first-time founders and scaled up really fast, and they didn't know what they were doing, and they didn't understand like proper business fundamentals, or they got like starry-eyed because they had like a significant amount of product market fit, and they didn't fund certain strategies with like strong first principles thinking. And that's where I think me and my co-founder messed up. I think there's likely also something to be said about like the incentives for the people who are allocating capital. When cash is really cheap, you have an incentive to like allocate as much capital as possible. And so you see a lot of these funds just like giving away cash because it's like, oh, well, if every other VC fund is doing that and they're getting returns, like the VCs are gonna look incompetent to their LPs who give them money. And so I think it's like actually complex, and I think it could be like all of those things. I think that anything structural to tech, I'm not entirely sure. I don't know if it's like structural to tech. I think that the way that things like play out and how people laid people off, and that not being done in like a human way, is probably more aligned to the values of the founders and the executive team. And so that would be my guess. And like it takes, like when you're a bigger company, it just takes a lot more backbone to back those values, and it takes a lot more of like sticking your own neck out. And I think that we've actually seen cases where certain leaders are resonating with exactly what you said. Like Virgin Orbit, I think is the company that did their like space exploration. Their COO just came out and said like, I'm sorry, like we should have done better with like how we handled like spinning down the company. And I thought it was like actually a pretty compelling letter. And so I think it's like a complex answer. I think it's probably a mix of a lot of things. But what are your thoughts? Just like being like on the other side where, you know, you're kind of seeing this as a senior.
No, like I really appreciate your response. I feel like it was super like insightful. I think like once again, like personally, I'm speaking in the space where I like don't like really understand the mechanics of these things, but I just think like I don't know, because it's like a really like for at least I think it's a really like growing and changing industry, just because like relatively new and a lot of new players are coming into it. And a lot of the people that like enter are usually like pretty young, and maybe I just think that's in Berkeley, and I feel like everyone here is interested in tech, which they should be because it's a really interesting field.
Sure.
But like, since it's changing, I really do think that there's like a lot of opportunity for growth in like different ways, and I think that's the thing in like corporate America in general, and it's not necessarily like prioritized. I feel like the way that like I don't know these like specifics of things like oh like hiring like firing like is it something that's like planned, for example, like when you're deciding on like people's hires is something that like can be foreseen in the future, or is it really just like sudden, like I don't know.
Well, I think that's like a question that I'm trying to figure out for myself, because I plan on like investing and growing like multiple companies through my lifetime. And so the way that I see it is that when there are like major events where a lot of people who are like kind of in your class, like whether you're a founder or investor or whatever, are failing, I think that's like a moment for you to look around and figure out like who do you want to be based on how other people are responding, and then who do you not want to be. And the number one thing, at least for me, that I didn't want to be is I didn't want to be a founder who was like, oh, this is like the macro environment and like, you know, like we couldn't have foreseen it. Like, I know that's bullshit because I've seen other founders, like I know like Sam Altman has done an amazing job at OpenAI, being like very methodical in how he scales that up. And he's done it because he just has a lot of experience seeing a lot of different business models. So I certainly think it's possible. And I think that that's my belief anyway. That's what I want to believe, you know, more than I can say that it's like a hard fact or science. I'm sure there's like a lot of cases where certain companies, maybe they really couldn't foresee things. Like I know a lot of companies that totally went up. Like I have a friend who runs like an eco-tourism company in Australia, like really random. But like his company like totally imploded when the pandemic hit. And it's like, there's nothing he could do about that. So obviously that's not like related to this, where like cash gets really expensive. But I do think there are like legitimate reasons. Sometimes, you know, you could be a company that has a lot of really expensive capital expenditures where you just have to like run a lot of machines, maybe like you have to fabricate your own machines, and then you're screwed. You're like, well, we had no other way to operate. And so it is easier to look at things in hindsight. What I think is cool is that in environments like this, like I said, you get to choose who you want to be. And I personally think for people both entering the workforce and like founders who kind of, you know, had their asses handed to them, including myself, I think it's a moment where we could like see a lot of legitimately impressive people come out of this, not only from like an output and execution standpoint, but also from a values and opinionation standpoint of like what kind of consciousness they want to see grow in the world, which I know is like a little bit of a hippie woo-woo answer. That's who I am though. I don't know.
I think it definitely makes sense, and I feel like even if we can like point fingers, like I do think because like I think startup culture is really cool, and I think everyone I've met who's been like interested in it, myself included, has had like really positive and inspiring intentions, and I do feel like a really big part of it, outside of like allocating blame to certain people or others, is like genuinely just like a culture of like really rapid growth and like certain decisions that come with that are not like default to anyone as much as like a systemic type of issue that is like hard to like pick up on early on.
Totally. And you know, not to be again doom and gloom, but like I do also know a lot of people who are like probably borderline sociopaths. And so I do know other founders who are like, oh, we don't give a shit, like we'll scale up and then yeah, like the market's gonna get tight and then we'll fire people. And I legitimately know people like that. And I think that's like also important because I am like painting like a rosy colored picture, but I think that the thing that a lot of people find is when they get into positions where they can allocate more capital, you do end up finding more people who are like more sociopathic in nature, and that just comes with the territory. So, you know, also being a little bit real. Yeah.
Yeah. What was the first time in layoffs? What were like the biggest mistakes you made, or biggest learnings you had after that experience?
Yeah, I think so the biggest I think the biggest mistakes that I made like leading up to the layoffs, honestly, are mistakes of like guarding my own mental well-being. Like I think that when I look at how quickly we scaled up, which to be clear, like me and my co-founder are directly responsible for, like us scaling up as quickly as we did. It's like there was a lot of lapse in first principles thinking. And the reason I actually laid out that like OS of a company slide is because we fucked that up, like big time. You know, like it's really easy when you have a lot of capital, also when your company is growing really fast, to say, oh, like there's all this new work, we'll just hire someone, because we know that like our metrics are going up like some crazy amount every single quarter. Instead of doing the work of saying like, well, do we actually really need to get this done right now? And like, are there failure modes where like, if this work doesn't pan out, actually like, then someone won't have work to do. And if that happens, then they might not have a job if like money gets tight. And so I think that like, we ended up making a lot of laps in these first principles thinking. At that time, at least for myself, I was working, 100-hour weeks for 7 or so months straight, because I'd done like 2 executive roles, and then at one point my co-founder was on paternity leave, and so I was also doing like the CEO role, so I was doing 3 executive roles for a month, and I really reflected on that, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna guard my like physical and mental well-being as much as humanly possible. I think the other learning that I had from like how we actually executed on it though, like things can always be better. The thing that sucks about layoffs is that you're trying to hit a number. And so like you're trying to hit a number of like how efficient you need to make your business and how much runway you need to get to in as short of a period of time as possible, and without letting like everybody know, because when you let people know, people start freaking out, and that causes a lot of other issues. And so I feel like my learnings from that, like honestly, I feel like I wish I had brought maybe like some of our leaders that were like a layer down from our executive team into the fold faster, because they had like a better pulse on like what the individual teams are doing than us. And I wish I had done that, because I feel like we definitely, you're never going to get it right, but I feel like we definitely, we definitely let some people go who, if we had just brought somebody into the fold and taken a chance and been like, look, like, we trust that you won't tell other people this sucks, but like we just need to make sure we're like doing what's right for business. I do wish we had done more of that. Yeah, but it was rough, like I got off like calls with people where like people were like, oh, we're just about to like have our second kid, and like it's a shitty situation, so yeah.
How did you deal with the stress of the 3 exec roles?
Not well, like, because when you're working that much, it's like basically like when you're working above, 80 hours a week, it's not about like how much more time you can fit in. It's like about how efficient you can get with your time and how efficient you can get with like multi-threading. And then ultimately you end up like scaling out of certain things. So certain things end up getting done usually not as well, because you end up scaling out of like a bunch of things where you can't actually empower your like leaders to like do the job on their own for like multiple reasons. And so for me, the way that I didn't handle the stress well. Like I ended up like starting to drink. I ended up starting to drink more. I ended up starting to do a bunch of things that I knew weren't good for me, but were like just getting me through to like waking up the next day and being able to handle like all of the stress of like 10 different people problems like popping up in that day. And so I basically like did what you do in school, which is I just took like, I made like a timetable of my day, and I just made a habit out of it. And I was like, okay, like every like 10 to 15 minutes, I have to like hit some goal. And if I don't, like everything massively like derails, which is obviously a terrible place to be in. Like if you're in that position, like you are not scaled out nearly enough, like you are running on fumes and you're gonna like do something totally wrong. And I got a lot of stuff wrong. So the answer is not well, honestly.
And like, how did that change like later? Why did you not do as much work? Did you implement some stuff which could like make you take breaks? Or?
No. Yeah, I didn't have enough time to take a break. I think that at the end of like the first round of layoffs, like I was just I was like a shell of like myself, and so I think there's like, does anybody here like watch Andrew Huberman or like listen to his stuff? All right, sweet, awesome. He has like this metaphor from like a guy who's on his podcast where he talks about dopamine, where it's like a wave pool, and if you just like constantly like keep like maximizing the wave pool, like water like flushes out. I had like tried, like I was basically using like substances to like pour as much water into like the bottom of like a completely empty wave pool every single day, and so yeah, like I didn't handle it very well, and honestly I was like totally overextended, and I'd gone from like in my CTO role I feel very confident because I know the team, I know the technology, and I like am technical in engineering. In HR, like the first day, I was just like talking to one of our director of people ops, and she was like telling me like she was talking about like redoing LOA, which is like leave of absence, and she like threw out all these acronyms, and I was like, I have no idea what you're doing. And so it's like every day just like not knowing what you're doing, and so like that on top of like juggling it, it's just like I did not. I think the right thing would have been to hire another VP of people as soon as possible. That would have been the right thing to do. And I think a lot of founders, like, they want to do what's right for the company. And for me, when I took over the team, honestly, it was such a dumpster fire. Like, people didn't have any documentation standards. There was, like, no project management. Two of our lead directors were, like, fighting with each other on a daily basis. There was, like, no structure. And so just out of pure ownership, I told my co-founder, hey, like, I know we want to hire this VP of people role, but let me just, like, fix things up. It'll be, like, 3 months, and then we'll be good and we'll hire someone. And then when like the layoffs also happened, like everything just started getting elongated. And so I think one of my biggest learnings was like, make sure that I'm like adequately scaled out of something else if I think there's like a certain vector of chaos that could come up. And in an HR role, there's like an immeasurable amount because everybody's people problems like flow up to you. So, yeah. Yeah.
After performing, there was 2 waves of layoffs. How did you notice it affecting team morale?
Yeah, I mean, instantly. You know, it was interesting because we did the first round before our offsite, and well, it actually ended up being good because people got together at least and they were able to see each other. I think that if you're like in a remote environment and you know like a bunch of people have been laid off and you're just like on your computer the next day, like I can't imagine how shitty of a feeling that is. And so, yeah, the first round it was like everybody was like totally bummed out. I think the second round was like there was a lot of fear in the system. You know, a lot of people started shifting towards like, okay, we're like now scared of losing our jobs versus like trying to do what's best for the company. We started getting like I still to this day get significantly less feedback from our team than I would like to. And so we are still like, we're on the up and up, but I feel like we're still like paying for some of this like cultural tax. And it takes like a really strong and clear and guided message from leadership to like reverse that. And I think that we're gonna be doing a lot of that literally this week through next week for the company. But basically like what it is at this point is like, hey, this is what we think it takes to win. This is like who you have to be in order to help us win. And like, if you are not that person or you came on board to be like on a totally different journey than we are now, we get that and we're gonna like help you find, like you can use my network. We're gonna help you find like a new opportunity, especially, I think there's gonna be like some sort of message like that that'll go out. Yeah, cool. What's up?
Yeah, so when and how did you recover from that period when you overworked yourself?
Look, slowly. So, you know, I honestly, it was just like a lot of cathartic conversations with my co-founder about like how we got there. That helped me recover more than like taking time off. Luckily though, I did like also get to take time off and that was good for me. And basically, I just like fully focused on not looking at the screen, not like dumping my dopamine levels, you know, and then also like reestablishing my relationship with social media, like in a pretty big way, which has been the biggest thing, honestly, for me. Yeah.
I feel like you've been interrupting you too much. Is it okay if it's kind of unrelated, or would you prefer to finish the presentation?
Sure, like go ahead and ask and then
Yeah.
I'll just go on after
Okay,
this
sounds good.
question, yeah.
It is really interesting to me that you mentioned like you struggling with documentation and like managing the HR portion, because for the company that I work for, I use Loom every single day,
Oh,
and
sweet.
it helps me with documentation. Like someone asked me, my boss asked me for like onboarding, what forms do we need? I was like, here's my Loom, like I recorded it, you can just watch it and like share it with the team. So I feel like it's helped me with documentation a lot. which is why I was like interested to hear kind of more about like the idea of Loom. Is that the reason you guys like came up with the idea and created Loom? And how does that like translate to your work and your HR management right now?
For sure. I mean, I think that Loom is great at documenting like onboarding use cases. I think one of the pains with Loom is that you lock a lot of information in the video content. And so like, you know, if you're like in a Slack channel and there's just a bunch of Looms, it's like, oh shit, I have to like watch this 10-minute Loom, like this sucks. And so like, I know about all the complaints at this point, but I appreciate you recording with us. Thank you for recording with us. I think the genesis of the idea for us, honestly, was like, it was less so about like documentation or anything like that. We were pivoting through the user testing space for like 6-7 months out of like my apartment in San Mateo, and we were just like working really hard, and our only outlook was we just wanted to like do something cool with like our best friends. You know, we're like, we just want to give this a shot. We were pretty sure it was gonna fail. And then like, you know, at some point we made the final pivot, and really it's kind of like a cliche like Hail Mary story, but you know, we had like no money left, and we had like maxed out we had like each of us had like $20,000 of debt in our credit cards, and like we unlocked like our Chrome extension from our user testing platform and just launched that. And we thought that would be like a growth hack to funnel more people into our main user testing product, because at that point, for whatever reason, we hadn't like caught on that was just like never gonna work. And you know, like what ended up happening was like people just started using it for use cases we could have never fathomed. You know, like there's like this story that I tell people, and it's like an insane story. I remember this moment where this guy was like, hey, can you like repair my video? I took a look at the video, and it was like a guy screaming at his screen in Portuguese, and there was like a stock ticker that was going down. And I was just like, what is this? You know, and like, so I was like, you don't have to tell me what this is, but like, you know, I feel like I have to ask. And he was like, oh, you know, me and my partners manage like a $75 billion fund in Brazil, and one of my partners made a decision, and I just thought your tool was like the perfect way to let them know how I felt about it. So it was really not like documentation or anything like that. It was like we started to see the tool because of like how flexible it was, and then also I think because of time to market, which we got lucky on. There's like a lot of different waves of like remote starting to explode, internet speed starting to be like more globally adopted in areas like Nairobi and like all these other places where like, you know, I think that we just got really lucky with timing as well. Because there were other screen recording products at the time, but they like uploaded after you recorded, and like, you know, they were priced for like prosumers at like $20-$30 a month, and we kind of got lucky in like this one phase where we were able to like capture a lot of these different economic tailwinds.
So like, was there a specific value prop that like you guys had in mind starting, or was it more just like trialing and testing?
We thought that people would use it like us, like, and I was literally just giving feedback to people on their resumes. It was like, it was really, there was no vision. We made up the use cases, you know, like on the marketing page, it was like, oh, you could use it for sales and marketing, whatever, but like, we didn't see any of those use cases. It was just like, we tried to tailor it towards work. But yeah, I wish I had a better answer for you. You know,
No, that was great. Thank you so much.
Cool. Yeah. All right. I will try to get through this so we just get more to like free-flowing Q&A. All right, so we already went over this. So I feel like if we're talking about values, like there's a few different characteristics to grit. This is probably not like super complete, but I think the most important thing is like a reason to be hungry. Like by far, this is like the #1 thing that blocks people from pushing through when things get really tough. But you know, people call it like a chip on your shoulder or whatever else, but you know, just a reason to really give a shit. And that's like the #1 value above everything else. But these are some required values that at least I've seen. Like you need to be able to be optimistic and have courage and be authentic. And when I say black box opener, it's like, you know, you run into something that you don't know about, and instead of saying, I don't know it, like I can't solve it, like you try at least. There's like a limit to that, obviously, like depending on what your capabilities are. And then like some optional but recommended values for me is like humility and openness. Otherwise you work with a lot of really smart assholes. So I touched on this before, but like the reality when you're hiring to start is that you don't have any credibility. Like no one, like really, like even if you have rich parents, like that only goes so far. So no one really gives a shit. Like you probably have really poor hiring and selling skills. In fact, I still think I have poor selling skills, and I've been like working on this for so long. And like I said before, you will likely hire B players, and I know that sounds mean, but what I mean by B players is like people who maybe just aren't there yet mentally to be activated and do really great work for like a number of reasons. Not necessarily talking about people who are just like worse than other people. And what's the most important thing is that you need to set a really high bar for what you expect out of everybody on the team, and you need to fire fast if people don't match that. And so that's just the reality when starting out. And there's a couple of things that you might end up having to concede on. So like if you really want in person and you want everybody to be in person but you can't get that, then you might have to concede on like hiring remote. If you really want like senior people, you might have to concede on like hiring mid-level. And by the way, like I think all those things are great things in the end, but some things that you don't want to concede on that I feel like a lot of companies trade off on these days is entitlement and low grit. And I think those things go together. So someone feeling entitled to their job, entitled to like a pay raise, entitled to like some amount of hours in a market where it's like, nobody knows if they're gonna like have a job. I think these things are fine for like bigger companies, to be clear. Like I do think you should be entitled to like healthcare, at most companies that you go to. So like I'm not, don't pay me as like Peter Thiel, but like I think that there is like a high amount of entitlement in the market, and I think you shouldn't concede on that. Like you don't want to work with people who are entitled or feel entitled, because you're not entitled to anything. And so this is like basically the most important factor to success. Yeah, different.
Is there a good way to validate a candidate, whether the candidate has a low grade or high grade when hiring someone?
So tactically, the best interview I've run is, well, the best way to evaluate someone who has like high grit is to just hire a lot of people. But you probably can't do that at first, especially if you don't have enough capital or like a reason to hire those people. So like honestly, the best interview that I've run that I think gets at like some of that story and like gives you some like resonance with who the person is and what their vibe is basically going through their resume, even if they don't have like real work history, and at each job asking them like the same set of questions. This interview is called a top grading interview. So it was developed by this guy and this gal, I forgot what their names are, but they basically worked at McKinsey, and the book is called The Who Method, and it's a terrible book. Like it is the driest thing ever. The only thing you need to read is like the last page of every chapter, and they like cap it, and there's actually like a PDF online, so you can learn everything you need in like 10 pages with the PDF. But there is this interview called the top grading interview, and you ask the same set of questions, which is, what are some of the things that you accomplished? And you dig into those things. So when people say they accomplish things, there's like usually some like terminal, like some nexus point at which they like either handed it off to someone else or don't really understand the problem, and maybe it just worked, or like, maybe it really didn't work and they should have understood the problem. So you want to ask them like, okay, how did you solve that? How did you solve that? How does that work? And you want to like dig into the problem. And I find that like whiteboarding coding questions and stuff like that just don't get to like nearly the same fidelity as like what problem have you solved. And I've actually even run this interview with people who haven't solved any technical problems, but they've solved like problems in their family life, and they've opened it up to me about it. And I was like, you are a really impressive human being, because the way that you break down problems is like very first principles thinking. And so that's the first question. The second question is, who was your boss and what was your relationship with your bosses in that role? And you want people to like be really open about like the failings and then the things that were good, or the things they wish they had been pushed on or they pushed on other people with. And then you ask the same question about the coworkers, and then you ask them like what their boss would rate them on a scale from 1 to 10 and why. And usually people who like have absolutely nothing and they're like, oh, like my boss would give me like a 10 everywhere, either they truly are amazing and just like super humble and you can pick up on that, or like usually they're like not a person that you want to work with. And so there's just like these set of questions that you ask over and over again. And the thing is that like if you ask them one off, it doesn't work. But if you ask them over and over again, you start to pick up on inconsistencies if people are giving you inconsistent answers. And so like the repeatability of asking the questions is really important, going through all of the resume. And it's really, really hard to scale because it takes a lot of emotional intelligence to run this interview. and it takes a lot of time too. And so that's probably the most impactful that I've found for like trade-off of like time to quality of assessing someone's like grit and also their value systems in general. The best way is to just do like a 2-week paid internship or like paid project where you bring someone on, but a lot of people won't do that, especially if you're like hiring senior roles. So yeah. But if you all find other ways, like I love like iterating on hiring. I feel like it's really hard and I still haven't gotten it right, so. Yes.
Did you notice any trends when you had your best hires? In terms of anything?
Yeah, so all of the early hires at Loom were like, or some of them were like some of my really good friends. And so those worked out really well, but we've also hired people who were friends where it didn't work out. And so I think that it's great if you have people and you want to take that jump and that leap of faith and it feels right, but yeah, your friends don't always make the best co-founders or co-workers. In Loom's case, it worked out that way, but I've also seen like so many cases where it doesn't work out that I wouldn't say, and like sometimes, like I said, you just don't, you know, beggars can't be choosers, and maybe a lot of your friends don't want to work with you, and they're like, dude, like I need to like find a real job, you know? So that's what it was for us for a long time, so yeah. Cool. So like the most important factor to success is just building something people want. Like basically everything else that people tell you, like optimizing your business model and growth channels and stuff is like a bunch of bullshit. Like don't believe it. The only thing that matters is like building the product people want. There's so many cases where like people have like built these companies where you funnel a lot of money into like the acquisition funnel, and then like you find out it's actually really inefficient to acquire these customers because they don't actually want what you're selling them. Like GoPuff is like an amazing example of this as a company. You know, amazingly successful company, like in a lot of rights, like I'm not completely ragging on it, but it's like, you gotta build a product that people really, really want. And I truly believe that, and that's just like, it's simple, but that's the most important factor of success.
When it comes to like finding like market fit, do you have like a old shape movement like the goal or yeah, like that, do you have moment like that, or like gradually looking back?
So now that I'm looking back, I think it was probably the moment where we launched on Product Hunt. We started seeing a bunch of different use cases and people signing up and asking for features, and when we would ship new features, they would use it immediately. But I don't think at the time it felt like product market fit. You know, like it did take us a while to build up that conviction. But when you have it, like I kind of explain it to people like this, like if you're at a party and you know it's cool, like you don't need people to be like, dude, this party's like dope, you know, like, you know. And so it's kind of like that with product market fit. It's like at a certain point you just see like your engagement numbers and you see people like asking you for like new features because they're like, I use this product in this way and I really need it. Like otherwise, like we have to move to something else. If people can even say they can move to something else because you have competitors popping up, that's like another really strong signal. And so there's like a lot of things that just start like popping up of like use cases, capabilities, feature requests, and like competitors. And even before all those things happen, you can kind of see it and feel it in the engagement metrics. If you're lucky enough to have a company where your company is using the product, then that's like obviously another strong signal. For us, we were lucky because we were using the product every single day. We're like, oh, we can't go back. Like we did this now. Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
I was wondering about like the path to building something people want, because I've seen some companies where the founder launches it and it's like immediately, it's not immediately successful, but it immediately finds that product market fit. But then with your story, it sounded like you said that like 7-month period was where you just wanted to build something cool with your friends, and like you kind of like didn't go in with like a clear vision of Loom, and it kind of like was a byproduct of iteration. Could you like discuss like what was that like 7 months like really like, and how did you stay so like motivated and like committed to doing something without even knowing where it was really going?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, well, to be clear, so like basically like how do you iterate your way to product market fit? Is that correct or okay, cool. So like basically I kind of alluded to this early on, but like whenever you're building a company, you feel like you are solving some problem that other people have. And the truth is that you really have no idea what other people want, and like most people don't, and the people that you're selling to usually don't know what they want either. And so you go through this like mode, and we did, where we like you basically lay out a hypothesis for what kind of problem you're solving, right? So you start with like a base hypothesis about like where the market is, what problem you're solving, and then like why you think people will buy it. And one of the traps is that like a lot of people try to get really sophisticated on why people want to buy it. Like sometimes the answer could just be you and your co-founders are like, it's just cool. Like this would be sick if it existed. And that's like good enough, you know? So like especially early days. But basically what you want to do from there is like build and then try to like get it in front of the people that you want to sell it to. And so that could either be, you know, for us, we were like launching on Product Hunt, which isn't actually I wouldn't say it's like the best channel now, but it's still good for like getting feelers out there. But there might be, you know, it's like the age-old question of like, where do your customers live and where do they hang out? And so that might be like a Discord group, that might be somewhere else. But basically you want to be like launching, and then if people aren't like using it, it's probably like, there might be problems with marketing and you want to give it like a little bit of time to bake and you want to, you know, really put it in front of people. We even like force people to use our product. Like I would go to Phil's Coffee and just like sit down and like put my laptop in front of people and say like, use this product. So you could go that path if you really wanted to. We were like super desperate, but you know, like I think that you want to get in front of people and try to get them to use your product. They're going to give you feedback in the form of like either not using it or giving you like feedback that may or may not be right. And then the magic is kind of trying to map what you're hearing and what you're seeing of how they're reacting to what you're building to what you think that means about your base hypothesis, right? And so then you start iterating on your hypothesis, like building new things, building like tangential products maybe, or like making an entire pivot based on some of the assumptions you're building up from before. The way that that looked for us was that like we started with this thing called, it was called Open Test, and basically it was, we launched this like expert network, which was what we promised was that like early stage companies all over the world could like get access to a network of like product experts at Amazon or Microsoft or Netflix. And in reality, this was just like our friends who felt bad for us. And so they would like record these videos with like QuickTime and these like really janky tools, upload it to our service and like basically run through somebody's product flow and give them feedback on that product flow. What we found is that our customers were like, this is really cool, but we want this from our actual users. And what our friends said was that this was just like not worth their time at all. They're like, we get paid like FANG salaries, like mango salaries, and it's like, we love you guys, but like, you know, this takes like 3 hours to do. And so then we iterated it to a platform where you could like put a piece of JavaScript on your website, and we built a Chrome extension where you could actually record this video of guided feedback and install that Chrome extension inline if you were a user going through like a website flow. So basically, you know, there'd be this little NPS smiley face survey. You'd say like, yes, I'm happy with this experience, or no, or like middle face. And then the website owners would be able to run like a campaign with a series of questions, and you'd be able to like record this video for them and like get like an award, whether it's like a coupon off of the service, whatever else. And we iterated through that space, and then eventually we like unlock this extension from the main platform. And so there's like a lot of hypotheses that we were like building up, like that led to all of the different pivots. So that's basically.
Yeah, no, because it's like interesting because I'm starting to think like, I think people think that startups, like success in a startup is all about the idea, but like just, I mean, I knew that iterating and like finding product market fit requires that much work, but like hearing every step, it seems like the crucial factor in building a successful startup is like comes down to the people, because like how it depends like how you as a person can manage all those moving parts, and like what is your approach to solving these problems. Like in your opinion, do you think that like what do you think is the key to building a successful company? Like boiling it down, obviously product market fit, but like what causes product market fit?
Yeah, I mean, this is like a little bit of a philosophical question, yeah. Right? Because I kind of break it down in a slide, but it's basically like, you know, if you want to increase luck, you have to keep going. And so you had asked that question of like, what keeps you going? I think that is very dependent on like where each person is and how much they can commit, like how much skin in the game they can give. And that's like, to be honest, like really barred by circumstance too. Like for me and my co-founders, you know, we were like 23, 24, 22, didn't really have any responsibilities. You know, we're really desperate to just like break. We were really tired of working a 9 to 5. We were just like desperate to break out of that mold and like try that. And so I think that's what the answer is for Loom. But I've seen that answer be very different for other founders. Like one of my friends, Sam Korkos, runs this company called Levels, which is not levels.fyi, which is like the salary tracker, but like it's like a continuous glucose monitor. And he has like a story about how like basically insulinemic response issues in his family have like really destroyed his family life, and like how so like his why is like, I need to like figure this out because like I don't want this to keep happening, and it seems like something we can like avoid. So it really just depends on the founders, Yeah.
But this is a question back to hiring.
Yeah.
But when you're first starting out, like where do you even like find people? Is it like just through you ask your friends, and their friends? Like, how did you guys go about like hiring individuals or where?
That's what we did at first. We also went on like a few hiring websites and like AngelList and also just like reaching out to people on LinkedIn. Thankfully with our tool, like that's actually a good outbounding tool. So I would just like record videos and like add it to like the little note with like the link, and I'd be like, hey, like good to meet you. Like I'd love to talk to you. But the truth is that it's a grind, and it's like a really the early stage hiring is like kind of the rite of passage for founders because it is like grueling. Like basically every insecurity you have comes up because you're like, well, why aren't they choosing me? Like, why aren't they like saying yes? Why aren't they reaching out? Like, is it because I'm like an X type of person, or like do they like you have to work through that, and it's actually like really hard. But the answer is like you're gonna end up trying every single avenue because people are likely not gonna be like, oh yeah, I really want to do this. Like not the number of people at the quality bar that's probably gonna like meet your standards, at least at first. Or maybe you get really lucky, and you do have a really good group of friends, and then that's awesome. Like I've seen that happen before too.
So like, what did you say to like your initial friends when you were trying to get them to join this I guess the startup that was not have a clear future? Like, what do you say to those people to convince them to like join on?
It's like a number of different things. I mean, like a lot of times I wouldn't tell them that I'm trying to hire them. Like I would be like, hey, can we like hop on a call and like talk about this or whatever, and then like try to get them to go. Like a lot of times too, it's a long sell. So for our first hire, I'd been trying to get him to like jump. He was working at Yahoo, and I was like, dude, why the fuck are you working at Yahoo? Like you're like totally bummed out. Like you don't like working there. Like you should join. And that was like the pitch for like 7 months. And so. Yeah, I mean like all sorts of things. I think also I tried going like direct with some people at my previous company, where I was just like, hey, we're like working on a lot of these really cool types of like engineering problems, and I know we like wanted to work on these types of problems before. It's like, it's sick, you should come here. But obviously like the other end of this is that you probably can't give out world-class salaries, so it's like people really have to want to join you. And they basically have to bank on like your equity value, which like I think a lot of people are like disillusioned, especially in this market, to that, rightfully so, to be honest. So you need to find like people that are kind of like impossible to find, because they have to like really want that journey, and they have to like really not want the big company thing, and they have to like believe that in their own agency and your agency to like make a meaningful amount of progress. And it's like really irrational. There's like no reason to believe that should actually happen. And so there's no other way to put it than like early stage hiring is just like really, really hard. And it's probably the #1 problem that founders who get funding struggle with for at least like 5 to 6 years, until they're like, okay, I think I understand like how people work on like a fundamental level. And basically, as you scale up, you end up playing like armchair therapist. Like a lot of my one-on-ones are like therapy sessions essentially, and you have to like introspect about like yourself and like why you have deficiencies in order to help like other people have the energy to be able to do good work. And that really helps in being able to like sell people, because then you start coming from a place of abundance where it's like you're not trying to like get them to join your thing. You're like, look, I'm just here to like, I have a really interesting thing. If you want to join, that's great. But if it's not like a good fit, I'm not going to try to oversell you. Like you're definitely not going to do that at the early days, because like you'll be super desperate. I mean, it's just like, and rightfully so.
Wait, even after you get funding, are you like, are people still hesitant? Because like, let's say you raise $2 million, and like, are people still going to be like, oh, what's this?
Totally. 100%. Yeah, because There's no like guarantee of job safety. Like $2 million is really not a lot of money. When you think about like paying people's salaries, if you're hiring like, if you're hiring people who are like graduating from Berkeley, you guys are all going to be making like a decent amount of money. So yeah, $2 million for people who are like really critically thinking about it, they're like, oh man, this is a big risk. But this is also where like finding the right kind of people. There are some people who are like, I wouldn't do it any other way, or they're like, I don't really care. Like I'm just here to learn as much as possible, which are the best types of people. And the good thing is that because of like remote work and because of distributed, if that is something that you're willing to do, you open yourself up to like amazing people that will do anything and like be super loyal because they just have the opportunity to do something cool. One of our earliest engineering hires was a guy I ended up reaching out to online who had like made this like really janky sort of like pet project for like queuing services. And his entire resume was just working for this high school district in the middle of like the Appalachian Mountains, like literally in the middle of nowhere. And I remember hopping off of like my top grading interview that I ran with him. And I was just like, guys, like he has no credentials, like, like absolutely, I know we're like interviewing people who like come from Google or wherever else, like he has nothing, but he is phenomenal. Like this guy is like sharp and he's also very humble. Like I actually don't think he knows how good he is. And you can find people like that if you like put your ego aside of like the types of people you want to hire, and you actually find that those are the best people because they just want to learn. And now he's like in his 40s and he's like, I can't believe I've had like, the way he puts it is like a Silicon Valley scale-up experience. And I'm like, Steve, like you basically made this happen with us. Like you're running all of our most critical systems. So that's like the silver lining is that I think now is like the best time to find these types of people. Yeah.
What were like the best places you found like I guess undervalued talent? From your own experience?
I think people who are coming from education, there's like a lot of people who are really passionate about education and like helping people have better access to education, whether it's like our COO right now, she like worked at Teach for America. She also worked at Uber, so this is like a little disingenuous. Like she did have like other things on her resume, but I do find that a lot of people who are in education are like severely undervalued, in my opinion. I think they've joined that work because they have like a really strong mission to do right by like the next generation of people who are trying to better themselves. And you have a lot of people that are really strong first principles thinkers, but they just don't really get a chance. And so I'd say education is probably the number one. And the most overrated by far is hiring from Google. Like most overrated by far hiring. And we have great people from Google, to be clear. Like we don't have like a hiring ban on Google or anything, but like, I wouldn't fault you if you did put one in place. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so have you ever hired someone from like your close, relations, like for instance, like a close friend or like a family member, but like after a while it didn't work out well? I mean, that their performance wasn't like that good. Like how did you make that improve? Or like how did you kind of, fire that person? How did you like make the decision, and like how did you tell the person that?
Yeah, so I ended up hiring, so the second engineer, he actually just recently moved on to like explore his own stuff. He was the second engineering hire at Loom. Really good friend of mine, was on the precipice of having to go back to India, had gotten fired from Facebook because of like some things we don't have to go into. But he, really smart guy, I think really misunderstood. Like I think he has a lot of like strange quirks about him that a lot of people don't get, but when you get to know him, he's actually like a really good person. And we took a chance on him, and like I ended up hiring him. I ended up having, Paulius, who's that first engineering hire, interview him, so there was like absolutely no, like as little bias as possible, so I wasn't like in the interview process. And we ended up hiring him, and there were fluctuations in his performance, and I ended up being his manager. And during that period, I also ended up being his roommate, which was like a really strange, so like you could imagine doing like a performance improvement conversation and then being like, all right, peace, dude, and then you're like walking to the same apartment. It's like really fucking awkward. So yeah, I have like a lot of stories like this. What I'd say is that yeah, definitely don't room with people that report into you. It's like a number one. But I think also, you know, the truth is that over time you end up having to build a pretty thick skin, because the only thing the market rewards is like how close to reality you are of like how people spend money. And part of that equation is like your output. And so you do just end up, it just ends up sucking, but you have to have like open and honest conversations. And you know, my personal framework, I think a lot of people really overcomplicate performance management, and I think it actually creates like a really inhuman sort of divide where it's like you get this like really corporate speak of like, hey, like we need to see these improvements in this time, and it's like, I really think it's simple. It's like, okay, you know, we're at point A. Do you agree we're at point A? Yes. And a lot of times people will agree. They'll be like, yeah, like my output's like kind of shit, or like we're floundering around, or like this timeline's going off. Okay, like I think we need to get to point B. Do you agree? And then there might be misalignment there. And so like you have to work on that misalignment. And then once you're aligned on point A and point B, it's like, okay, how do we get there together? And you just have that conversation, and if you keep having to have that conversation, then you let them go. And that's like basically all performance management can be summed up to that. And people will give you like a bunch of frameworks of like, you know, Kim Scott's like radical honesty, or like radical candor. And then there's like also like nonviolent communication. So there's like a lot of these things that you can learn that will help you communicate with like more people with different personality types, which you absolutely have to master as you scale up. But yeah, I think that like basically everything follows that formula. And actually more performance management goes wrong because managers just find it difficult to just have that conversation quickly, like as soon as the problems start popping up. And the problem is that you're not actually taking care of the other individual, because you're like sitting on this feedback and it's going to impact their livelihood at the end of the day. So I don't know, that's like, honestly, like whether it's your friend or somebody else, like at the end of the day, it's like you end up realizing, especially as you scale up, it's like business, and you just have to do right by them as much as possible, and them do right by you.
How was it like to drop out of college with all the uncertainty that came from it?
I think around that time I was probably doing like a little too many psychedelics, and I had like started reading Steve Jobs' biography, and I'd like gotten a MacBook Pro, and I thought it was like the best thing in the world, and I was like, I just want to learn how to make these things. And so I would like, honestly, a lot of naivete, to be honest. I think also a lot of like not a lot of support. You know, like I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in a really small cornfield town where now it's different, but when I grew up there, you know, like a lot of like small-mindedness, and like a lot of my friends who had kind of like surrounded myself in college were like, you're absolutely crazy, like you'll be back. Like basically just shit you don't want to hear when you're like about to make a giant leap. You want like support, but not a lot of support. And then like a lot of fear for the first time, a lot of fear from my parents, which was interesting because like I had already let them down a lot in high school. Like I wasn't like the best student. So like to get even more fear was like, especially as like an Indian kid, you're like, oh man, like my parents worked really hard to get to this country, to give me this opportunity, and now I'm like screwing it up. And so, yeah, I mean, like it was taking a bet on myself. And honestly, the bet was like fueled by like being short-sighted and not really knowing what I was getting into, which I think is like the best propellant to do really cool stuff. Like when people think too much about like where the landscape is going, a lot of times they don't take action. Are you thinking about dropping out?
If I get the idea, maybe.
Anybody else here thinking about dropping out? Cool. Well, after this, if you guys want to DM me on Twitter or something, like I'd be happy to talk through anything. All right, so this is the next slide. I think you must be technical in some way. This is basically the hierarchy of skills for early stage companies. It's like, and this is, by the way, like you can replace coding with something else. Like if you're doing something that's really ops heavy, that might be different. But basically, like your top technical thing, the ability to sell, whether that's to investors or like prospective clients, and then like design, UX, and like product thinking. This is basically the hierarchy of skills for early stage. Everything else is like kind of bullshit. you know, and like everything else is a lie. And you can choose to believe it. You know, if you're like, oh man, like I think marketing is really important, you can choose to believe that and just like figure it out for yourself. I'm not here to like sell this too hard. The one thing I'll say is that if you're going really deep in any of these things and you're trying to start an early stage company, you really want to go full stack and like you want to have that mentality for everything. I think that seems obvious, but you know, if it's coding, full stack, if it's selling, it's like, you don't care if it's like enterprise or anything like that. It's like you don't have any experience anyway, just like learn everything. So I don't think we need to belabor that point. And honestly, I think large language models are going to be extremely helpful, enabling all of us to like basically introspect on a large amount of data and like find really novel insights that are actually really hard and like are kind of like siloed away in like individual knowledge. So I'm pretty optimistic about that. This is the stuff that, at least in my opinion, or what I've seen over time, really doesn't matter 99% of the time. And I say that because like I have examples where this has worked really, really well. Like I have examples where somebody's built a community and it's like, holy shit, this is like the best thing ever. But you know, like being tied to a noble cause, being tied to a vision, growth hacks, building a community, product carried by the brand of the founder, like give me a fucking break. We are a team of Xfang/Manga. I actually think this is a red flag now. What does matter 100% of the time is to want the experience of building a successful company. That will always matter because like that's the journey you're on. And so you can choose to do that or not. Like you can choose all these other things, but like this is ultimately the thing that I've seen like pan out to like the biggest probability of success because you're just there for the journey and it's a really grueling journey. It's a long journey. So fundraising, I think we kind of talked about this, but you know, like VCs with no successful operating experience. I'm sorry if you are like someone who's done like a student-led VC thing, just telling it how it is. A lot of like staff and principals, engineers and designers who really aren't. What's been working less is like having a good idea but no execution. A lot of those things were getting funded, you know, the last couple of years. That's like really hard to do now. I don't know if you all know that or not, but it is. X but for Y startups, this happens a lot in like the YC portfolios. You know, like a lot of people be like, we're like Loom for X or we're like Uber for X, and like that's working a lot less now because money is expensive. And then I keep belaboring on Fang and Manga, but being from Fang and Manga works a lot less. This is more of a joke, but having rich and powerful family members will always work. So this is basically how I think about it. It's not the only way to think about it. I've heard like, a lot of other good frameworks, but you know, how do you fundraise? You know, it's execution, which is barred by skill. So like, how good is the product? Are you iterating on your vision for like where you think the world should be going? Skin in the game, which is barred by circumstance. And so, have you quit your job or school? Are you working nights and weekends, or are you partying? Velocity, which is barred by circumstance and skill. So both execution and skin in the game. Like, how many iterations are you doing? How little time from thought to action is there? And then luck, which is barred by velocity. And so you can kind of see like this logic tree of like, you know, if you want to like maximize your chances of success and people investing in you, like the ultimate is like working every single second of the day, like not working on other things, just like being ruthless about having like technical foundations and working very, very fast, right? And then like luck will strike. Obviously, like circumstance, skill, like all these things block us from being able to do this 100%. And then the market too, like that's a huge part of luck. So this is kind of how I think about how you fundraise in practice, given that framework. I think that the co-founders should like start at some point and be like, okay, we're like committing this much time to whatever we're working on right now. And the circumstances of the different like co-founders will create like a disparity in how much investment they have. But you want to be working towards an investment bar being even amongst everybody and high. You want to build a hypothesis of the world pain. This is kind of what we were talking about before. And you know that guides the execution. You want to be like introspecting on why the hypothesis is wrong, iterating. And then what you want to do is you want to reach out to investors and keep them on a newsletter, ideally. I think this is like the number one thing that I've seen work for like most of my friends. It's like reach out to investors, you know, pick your hypothesis, find the ones that like align with that and are thinking about that part of the market, and then show them like, you know, even send them updates like, oh, our co-founder like quit his job and like, you know, whatever it is, like you want to be showing velocity, and I think that really helps like bring them along, especially in a period where maybe they're not like as willing to take a chance on you. And something I just wanted to say like is a little bit of optimism here is there's still a lot of capital to deploy. So it's really the willingness to deploy that capital that's gone down, but like the velocity of deploying that capital has gone down, but it's still there. And there's still market opportunities. There always will be. So this is like a moment to like really, in my opinion, become like a badass founder. Yeah.
For 1A, circumstances create experience structure.
So basically, like, for me and my co-founders, I was the one who was most easily able to ramp my commitment to like working more and more on the idea, because I could like contract as an engineer, like all this other stuff. One of my other co-founders lived down in LA, and so he literally had to like move up, and he had just proposed to his girlfriend, and so like he was just like in a different place, and he was like, look, I need to like figure out how to make sure she doesn't dump me, like, and so I need to spend a little bit of time with her and then ramp the work, you know, and like make sure she's okay with like taking this chance. And so you kind of start out on these like different a lot of times you start out with different investments, but you just want to be clear about that, because if you're not, that builds a lot of resentment if you don't tackle it. Cool. And we're almost at the end, promise. You know, one of the last things I really want to talk about is like protecting your mentality. Like, I think there's a lot of ways to look at the world and just say that like everything's falling apart. You know, like no one's fundraising, mass layoffs, like AI is gonna like make it so that like tech isn't cool and there's nothing to do. But there's a lot of ways to look at the world. Like right now is like the perfect time to crush it. Like I said, lots of capital to deploy. There's a higher concentration of talent in specific places, which I think is really interesting, rather than talent being like disparate across all these different startups that may or may not work out. And you know, like another mentality is like, if you can survive this market, you can survive anything. And like being a founder is like exceptionally difficult. And it's also exceptionally difficult to be an early stage employee. So like, even if you're not going to be a founder, like being an early stage employee is not easy. And I think large language models and like all this AI stuff is going to massively empower people to get more done. And I have like a lot of thoughts on that. These are the things that I think like of all times in the history of humanity are like the number one, well, history of humanity. We haven't had smartphones for all the history of humanity, but I think you should really avoid these things if you want to start a company and like maximize your chances of success. But these are just guidance. Like I think doom scrolling is just like a number one sort of, I think it's like a really sad thing that I see where people are just like scrolling and dumping their dopamine. Like these are like the basic building blocks of motivation. And like, you know, you're looking at people who have like a lot more than you, and it's like shit's already hard. You don't need to make your life harder. And like your mentality is like so important to guard. I put this as a second thing. I think that this is like actually important to say, but I also understand where people are coming from. Like I think adopting anti-capitalist beliefs, like I'm just gonna be real with you, like it is gonna be fucking hard to start a company if you have anti-capitalist beliefs. I'm assuming most people here do not, but I think that this is like also a gray area where like some people might. And I'm just saying like it's going to make your life harder when like your whole purpose is to like generate more capital, to allocate more capital, and you're like, oh, like I feel really shameful about this. You know, like it's just a hard place to be. And I do know, like by the way, I do know founders who do hold anti-capitalist beliefs and have succeeded, but it's like, I think the point is like reduce the number of things that make you feel bad, because like the startup's already going to do like tons of that for you. Like you don't have to worry about problems, you know, like the problems will find you. So anything that makes you feel like you were owed anything, because you're not owed shit. Like honestly, like no one owes you anything. If you have immigrant parents, like they'll beat this into you like more than anything. But even if you don't, like really no one owes you anything. And you know, you find that out like growing up in general, but you massively find that out when you try to start a company. And so that's the end. I just wanted to set like some energy for like how I'm thinking about the current stage, but I know we've kind of been doing Q&A in the middle, which has been great. Like, I don't know if people have other questions though. Yes.
I actually wanted to ask a little bit more about the previous point about scaling up. So like, what do you think is kind of like the benefit of scaling up really, really fast versus like in a more methodical way, not like in a minimalist entrepreneur way?
Yeah.
Because like, I feel like the definition of a startup is a company that grows really, really fast.
For sure. Well, maybe not. By the way, it is 8:05, so if people want to leave, like, I'm like, please go for it. Like, I know you guys all have lives, so.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, and also just for winning you as well. Like, if,
Yeah, I've got time. My
please
flight's
don't feel like
my flight's like 4 hours out, so
Okay.
I've got a little bit of time to like answer any questions for people who want to stick around.
Yeah.
But for people leaving, thank you for coming. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good luck with your midterms. Good luck with those. And please feel free to walk out anytime. So, I don't know if I think that a lot of successful startups do scale up quickly. Thanks for the great questions again. But I don't know if that, like, I actually think that's like really a bug and not a feature. I think where you want to scale, like if you go back to that like operating system of a company, you really want to scale when you know putting more humans at the problem will have outcomes, like positive outcomes for your company. So, you know, like an example is like with Uber, like hyperscaling. I think they hyperscaled like in too many different places, but at least hyperscaling on the ops side when they're like, we know this works across multiple geos. Like for instance, we know this works in like LATAM, and we have like a lot of success in Mexico. Let's start doing it in like Colombia and Peru or wherever else. That's like a good type of scaling, because it's like, okay, we know the business model works out here. Uber maybe is a bad example because there's like a lot of other things where they like barred the market and did like price discrimination that really didn't lead to like healthy business outcomes in the long term. But generally speaking, I think you want to get like the goals and the work right. And if you find that there's just like a lot of like iterative work that you can get out of that with more humans, that's when like scaling up really helps. Yeah. Yeah.
For the very like early stage opportunity when you were kind of working, like how many co-founders do you have? I feel like you haven't really dove into that, or how many did you start with and then end with? I guess throughout the process.
Totally. See you, man. Have a good one. Good luck figuring out if you're gonna drop out. Yeah. So we started with 4 co-founders. One of them really didn't end up working out. You know, he just wasn't. I don't think he really believed in us as a team, and he just wasn't really like pulling his weight. And we found out he was interviewing for like other marketing positions when we were talking about like moving off of our jobs. So we basically, you know, gave him the option of, we basically gave him the option of taking $10,000 worth of equity, or like us cutting him a $10,000 check, and he took the $10,000 check, and that's like a massive multi-million-dollar mistake now. So it's a different story. But I think the second co-founder who's no longer at the company, Shahid, there for a long time, one of my best friends. Like I'm literally flying back tonight to be there for his birthday party tomorrow. But you know, for him, it's like he was just really young. And I mean, we all were, but he was exceptionally young. Like he never went to college. He was 20 at the time that we started the company, or 21. And you know, at some point, we started to see that the journey was going to be like, you know, you have a massive scale up experience where like your entire life is in the company, and then there's like a little bit of plateau, massive scale up. And for him, he was looking at this next massive scale up of potentially taking on our business operations and sales functions. And he was like 26, 27, and he was like, guys, like, I want to be like a 20-year-old. He had like literally never been a 20-year-old with like time on his hands. And so that was like a natural parting that was totally amicable. And like, we're all just like still best friends.
Yeah.
So 4 people, 1 didn't work out because of commitment, and then the other just life circumstance. But, you know.
Yeah, and then when you guys were like jamming together, you said like that 7-month process, right? Were you guys actually like super procedural about like hypothesis, test, here we go, like launch?
No, definitely.
Or like, was it like actually like in practice?
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, you do that work. You know,
Yeah.
you want it to guide your iteration, but at some point, like you do need to try something new. And so a lot of it was also just like excitement to like build something new. Be like, oh, okay, like this is obviously not working. Like let's try something new. And you do get to like kind of a point where you're less hyped because it's like shit, like a lot of things aren't working now. And so that's like that's where you start leaning more on the hypothesis and the strategy side. And so it's always actually that's still like a tension right now at the company for us, where it's like a couple of our strategies really didn't pan out, and so you feel that energy at like within the company, and it's like, okay, we need to like break that and like get more optimism. So I'm trying to figure that out at scale now. Yeah.
Earlier in your slides, you had put that the people that have gotten.
So, yeah.
I'll just like
Twitter, VHMTH.
Oh, yeah.
It's perfect. Yeah.
On your slides, you put that you don't want to hire the people that just got laid off. Why
was that?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I think that what I was like trying to be more precise on, but maybe did a bad job, is saying that there's a lot of people who were at these companies because they just wanted like a bunch of money or titles or whatever, and now they like just need work, you know? And I think you can take a chance on those people if you really want to. I think that if someone is like, look, like, dude, if someone's like super open and they're like, this is who I was, like now the market shifted and actually I've realized that I just want like a new start and to like actually commit, that might be somebody you want to take a chance on. But by and large, like you're already gonna screw up hiring so much that I would avoid trying to hire those people. So it's less of the people that got laid off, because I think a lot of really capable people got laid off, and I actually think a lot of amazing companies are gonna get started by those people. It's more like the people that were trying to chase these new titles and like maybe work hosting, and like let's be real, like if you're gonna lay off people, like it is a number you're trying to hit, but I'm sure that like the approximation a lot of execs are trying to do is like who's the lowest performer. And so you can take that chance. I think that really, it's gonna depend on like what that person's value systems are and like why they ended up there and like how open they are about it. Like how much of a growth mentality do they have?
Thank you.
Which is hard to figure out. Yeah.
How do you think someone can improve their ability to increase their output in terms of like a day-to-day, and also there's longer term, like, because I feel like I don't know, just like the way you carry yourself and like the way that you answer these questions is very much like it's so like high level. It seems like in terms of the way you structure things in your mind. So like how do you, like sometimes I feel like I struggle to maybe do that or like create greater output. Do you have any advice?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like to be fair, like I've been at this for like I'm about to be 31. You know, like I'm like older than everybody here. And so it's like, I think I've had like a lot of time to think about these things in like a really pressurized way, which helps you retain that information. My output has definitely gone up like over time, and like my useful output has gone up because like you spend a lot of time like, you know, it's like, oh, like I did all this work, and it's like, dude, you like spent all this time on Instagram. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like output, I think it's like really dependent on the major things that basically, output is going to be dependent on the major things that reduce like your well-being and like your ability to like clearly think and to be motivated. So that's like dopamine, that's hormones, like all the physical health stuff that I could talk about of like, you know, you want to be like doing some sort of like either weightlifting or like resistance training in some way. It doesn't have to be weightlifting. You know, you want to try to get as much sleep as possible, but that might not be possible like early on depending on your circumstances. You know, and you want to avoid, like, I think now honestly the most applicable advice I could give, and I know I've given it a lot, is like you really want to curb how much dopamine you're dumping. I think a lot of people, you know, they wake up and they just like stare at their phone first thing in the morning, and it's like that is like the time when your cortisol is like trying to get generated. That's like the time when you know, you're basically screwing over all of your motivation circuitry. It's like, and this stuff like the dopamine stuff like it's like the rudder that pushes you to like literally move one foot in front of the other. So it's like a really fundamental like neuromodulator that you're screwing up. I'd say all those things, like also meditation. I mean, I think that meditation is great. I find it fucking impossible to meditate. Like I've tried so many times and I've just fallen off. So I'm giving that advice because we did it and it worked, but I don't know if I can like, you know, preach it because I don't do it consistently. For me, what I found is just like really hard physical exercise is like my way to get into a meditative state, or like hitting like a sauna, cold plunge sort of thing. So it's like, it's all the really cliche, like honestly all my answers for like how do you get more output are like, if you listen to like Joe Rogan and Andrew Huber, it's like really, really cliche, but it works. It really works, you know? And then the other thing is like surround yourself with people who like inspire you and who want you to do better and like who aren't bringing you down and like kind of shitting on your dreams. So like I think that's like also really important. It's hard. That's harder because like some of these people might be your family members, like, you know, to avoid that could be difficult. So it's like really circumstantial too.
Really just build off, like what is your best advice you can give to like us students here in general, like the younger generation?
Oh my God.
Sorry, man, that wasn't a quick.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out if I have good advice. Let's see. Oh my God, I feel like I probably already said it. I really think the number one thing is gonna be this like, it's going to be the guarding of the mentality. Because I mean, like, even when I was walking around, you know, campus, I just saw, like, I literally watched you people talk about, like, how they're scared of, like, not getting jobs, and then, like, they're on TikTok, and, you know, it's like they're listening to these people, like, talking about how hard shit is, and I'm like, God, this just has to be, like, the number one advice. It's, like, so cliche, but it's like, if you do that, you literally will be happier. Like, it's hard to explain. And so I'd say that, but I'd also say, you know, I think trying to like put yourself in positions, and this is just like timeless advice. It's advice that I even got early on. Putting yourself in positions where you feel really motivated to learn as much as possible as like new students. This is really cliche, but it's like, I'll give you an example. The first job that I got like after my internship when I dropped out, I basically got rejected from like over 54 different companies because I was not ready to be a software engineer. And I got accepted to 2, and I basically emailed, just for like shits and giggles to see like whether or not he'd respond. I emailed Paul Graham, who's like one of the YC founders, and I emailed him being like, what should I do? There's like these 2 companies that I want to go to. One of them is this company called Backplane, and they basically like power Lady Gaga's social network, like, and they're trying to like create other social networks. Like, I'm not really big into the product, but like the people are really chill, and I like vibe with them, and I feel like I can learn a lot from them. And then there's like this other company called Pinterest, and I have no idea, like, I don't really vibe with the people. They're like, and this is how I used to talk back then, but I was like, they're super hipsters, and I don't really feel like, you know, like, I just like come from like frat campus. Like, I was like going through a transition because I just dropped out. I was like 21. And so I was like, where should I go? And he was basically like, you should go anywhere where you feel like you're going to maximize how much you can learn. And in this case, if you're not comfortable with your coworkers, you're going to learn significantly less because you're going to feel less inclined to like hang out with them, less inclined to like ask them questions. And so I think my advice would, like, it really has served me well, and it's served like all of my friends who I consider like more like they've done like a lot more in their life, like even, you know, like Dylan Field of Figma, and like Ivan, like all these people that I know who have like just constantly put themselves in situations where they're just trying to learn as much as possible and be curious. And I think that if you find yourself in a place where you're not curious, like, that's a really good sign that you need to change some shit. Because like, if you're in a place where you're not curious, like, life sucks. Like, it's just like everything has less color, everything is less cool. Like, you're less optimistic and like happy and like vibrant. And it's like really insidious too, because that can happen slowly, you know, over time. And I'm sure that people here are like engineering students or have like super hard classwork. Like, I'm sure you all know that. So.
So did you choose the Lady Gaga place?
I did, yeah. Yeah. Which is also where I met one of my co-founders, and it was an amazing decision. But, you know, the Pinterest would have been 14th employee at Pinterest, which would have been pretty sweet from an equity package standpoint. But so, you know, like, it's not always the right financial. Right, yeah. In hindsight, but, you know, it doesn't always work out. It's just like more about like fulfillment in life, you know. Yeah.
So you talked a lot about how like grit and like the qualities you look for in people you hire is like having a chip on your shoulder, like a reason to be there.
Yeah.
A lot of times when I think about those types of things, it's often related to like the vision or the product or the problem that like the company is solving. But you also talk about how like you shouldn't necessarily operate in a mindset of like just kind of being passionate about the vision solely or the problem that you're solving, like being so tied down to it. So like, what are other good like quote unquote chips on shoulders that you've seen that have like driven like successful founders? Yeah,
you know, to be clear, like, I do think that like being really tied to a vision, like I said, there are the 1% cases, and the 1% cases where people are like really tied to a vision or like a way of doing things where they do work, like, go very far, you know. So I don't want to like discount that. I think that, you know, like an example would be if there's like 3 people in the bio lab here and they're like, yo, we're like applying large language. I know I keep doing this large language model thing, but we're applying large language models to like a bunch of genomic sequencing, and like we found like some really cool like things that we could unlock for humanity, and they're really sold on that. Like, dude, more power to that group of individuals, you know? I think what I was trying to say is that I find that starting a company and like wanting to do something successful is so difficult that the path that usually leads to the most outsized success for founders are founders who are like, I just want to start something successful. Like, that could start as like, I just want to do cool stuff with my friends, and then like something hits, which is the Loon case. It could start in different ways, but like, I think that shift to being like, I just want the journey of starting a successful company. Like the people who land there tend to do it. Like they'll fail more times because they're like, the goal is to like be on this journey. Yeah, yeah. But either path is totally valid, you know? Yeah.
So you talked about productivity and like your output. I think one of the biggest barriers for me with like output is like sleep. I like yet to figure it out. Like I feel like, okay, if I have like that 5 hour, like one day like I'll be working super late, I'll have that 5 hours sleep, and then like reflects in the next day, or oversleep super much. I've tried to experiment with sleep so much and like it's not really like working. So what would be like advice for you, like you would give for like?
I honestly think I'm like just like such a bad person to give advice here. Like I feel like I'm still paying for like the massive amount of sleep debt that I've had through like the last 10 years, let's call it. Yeah, I don't really have good advice there, to be honest. I wish I did. I think that like, you know, it's gonna be all the like, I mean, I've gone through periods where I do get better. Like right now I get really good sleep, but that's because I have like a reason to outside of like the startup. So I'm like training for like a competition in November. So like that's my reason to sleep, because if I don't, then like the next day, like I'm training for a boxing competition. So like the next day I'll get like beaten up. And so like that's basically the only thing that's worked for me. Other than that, like I'll rationalize like staying up and like, you know, doing more work because I really like what I do. And so I don't know, man. Like if you figure that out, let me know. But I feel like that is like a hard thing where like, and I also agree, I think really good sleep is like so important. Yeah. Yeah.
I was just curious about your approach to learning. Like you mentioned that you didn't get like that good grades in high school, but then like you also mentioned like a bunch of books that you've read, and you're also like doing like boxing. Like what's your approach to staying curious and learning?
Yeah, I didn't get good grades because I didn't know I could. Like honestly, like early on, I just like I was born like I feel like everybody's born with like a set of cards of like how their mentality is, and like I was born with like a bad operating system, like brain-wise, and like a lot of my family is. And so I actually didn't know it was possible to like truly be like curious and like own something. Like my plan was like go to the military, which there's nothing wrong with that, but you know, it's not generally like the most curious set of individuals. And so like intellectually curious, which is also wrong. I'm not tons of intellectually curious. I actually take that back. But I think that, you know, what I'd say is that wanting to be intellectually curious for me like stems from just wanting to live like a really happy life. And for me, the way it worked out is like it's really cliche, but like around the time that I was getting really bad grades, and then when I shifted to caring about like getting good grades, it was actually more about like me wanting to get out of my hometown, which was just kind of like a piece of shit cornfield town in the middle of nowhere, where I like got the crap beaten out of me like a lot. And so I watched this movie called October Sky, which is like about these like kids in a coal mining town, where they like everybody who escaped town was like only escaped town on a football scholarship, and these kids like started playing with rockets. And it's like the story of this guy named Homer Hickam and his friends, and he basically built like a lot of the astronaut training program at NASA and became like one of the most renowned astronautical engineers of our time. And that like really resonated with me at that time. And so I think like reflecting on that live here, it's like it's probably more of a circumstance of like the right time where I was ready to be like activated to want to care about being curious, which was spurred by like me losing a lot of my friends at that time, which like was really dramatic for me as like a 15-year-old, but like looking back on it, it's kind of funny. And then like seeing that like you could do really cool shit with science, and like I got really into it, and I was like, oh wait, like I'm actually like pretty decent at this. And then like, you know, I learned the skill of like being really curious about things that I'm really not good at, and like trying to just go really hard at those too. So I don't really have a good answer. I think that for everybody, it's like you have to be like in a place where you want that, and you kind of feel like you're at a bottom of like, you know, maybe life's like really monotonous, maybe you're really bored, maybe you're like not happy with a lot of things, and you have to like, I think you really have to go through that journey and reach those points, and then like be activated by something. And so I actually, what I find is that like discovering like a passion is a lot of like different random signals. And actually I keep going back to you know, spending too much time like being overstimulated as like a major problem to like discovering those passions, because you're just like, if you're always overstimulated, you know, you don't have enough time to be bored. If you don't have enough time to be bored, you don't have enough time to like be excited about things. So I don't know.
I know like we're 25 minutes over, but I'm just curious, like can you talk about psychedelics and like what happened? Like you kind of dropped it and then like everyone was shocked and then like you never mentioned it again.
Yeah, I mean, I think like, look, this is like a cliche. Like I am a walking cliche, and so what I'd say is that it's a cliche. Like a lot of founders like talk about this stuff. I am like a big believer in psychedelic medicine, and I'm actually a really big believer in like some of the research that's coming out where, you know, you can get a lot of the effects of it without going on like the 8-hour psychedelic trip, which I think is really good, because there's a lot of like random like stuff that could screw you up in that 8-hour psychedelic trip. But yeah, I mean, for me, like my experience is that, you know, I think they're like really powerful substances, and I think that you should take them seriously. And I think that I know a lot of people are like taking like shrooms, chocolates, and stuff like that. That's not really that's not my relationship with psilocybin, and it's not my relationship with a lot of these substances. I think that things can go really wrong because like your set and setting and your mentality like really influence the trip, and that's hard for people to wrap their minds around because they just think more drug, more experience. It's like that's not really how psychedelics work, and so it's been transformational for me. I know a lot of people who it would just be like a terrible idea to take a bunch of shrooms, so like I do not like blanket recommend it. But I'm like, yeah, I mean, like this tattoo is based off of a psychedelic trip that like changed my life. You know, I've done like a 5-MeO DMT trip, which is like the toad. And the way that I describe that to people is like, it's the single most important event that's happened in my life other than being born. And so like, these are like really, really powerful experiences depending on how far you want to go. And I wouldn't recommend it if like, I wouldn't recommend it if you're like taking it lightly. Like I would take it somewhat seriously, you know. Yeah.
How were you like before you did psychedelics, and how did it change you? That's that question. Like how did it change you? Like I listened to like one of your interviews and you talked about like it really helped your social anxiety.
But I said what?
It really helped your social anxiety.
Yeah, it certainly did, because the way that most of these things work is for sure. Let's see, guys. The way that most of these things work is they shut off this part of your brain, or they lower the activity of this part of your brain, called the default mode network, which is essentially like an interconnected web of neural pathways that help you make sense of like your identity through space and time. And so like a good example is, you know, one that I think like maybe you all could relate to is like, okay, you're like sitting next to your friend at a bar, and like, you know, he has someone that you both find attractive like hit on him. That happens once, you're like, oh, like great for my friend. If it happens twice, you might start thinking, what's wrong with me? You know, and like that's the default mode network. And so usually when you have like a lot of anxiety and a lot of depression, you have like an overactive default mode network. And so the major thing with psychedelics is that they help shut this off. And what people usually say is like, it helps you see the forest from the trees, because you're just like stuck looking at the trees all the time, and sometimes that really isn't helpful. And so that's like the basis of most of this stuff, not all of it. So like things like ketamine. I'm an investor in this company called MindBloom that does like major ketamine research and like distributes ketamine to ketamine centers around Canada and the US. That it doesn't exactly work off the default mode network, but that's like the gist of it.
Yeah. Did you take ketamine or?
Yeah, I'm taking ketamine, but I don't usually do that.
Influence the change or?
No, I'd say that psilocybin probably helped me more than anything. Mushrooms helped me more than anything. But again, I'm just gonna say like I don't want to evangelize for psychedelics, because I really think that they're like substances you don't want to play with. And also like if you're interested in this, I know this is an entrepreneurship course, so like you can hit me up after. You know, like I'm sure this makes some people uncomfortable. I just saw him like raise his hand, so.
Okay. Oh, what is that personal?
Wait, also,
we should
real
go.
quick, we have to leave the room at 8:30 because we get kicked out by the
I actually have to get going too.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
thanks
yeah.
for keeping me on time.
Yeah.